Hi, my name is Andrew Dabra, and I'm a sophomore in Branford College, majoring in chemical engineering. I'm from Accra, Ghana, and I'm currently the president of the Yale African Students Association. I'm pleased to bring to you one of our great virtual offerings for the 50th anniversary celebration of Yale's Afro-American Cultural Center, which we affectionately call the House. This session will focus on civic engagement. From its founding, the House has been a place where people come together for community and solidarity, as well as a place to work collectively towards social change on campus and across the world. Our alumni continue to carry the spirit of the House's founders in their civic engagement and justice work in service of causes that matter to them and to our broader community. This plenary session brings together campus and alumni leaders who work to build a better, different world as they discuss the challenges they have faced and overcome, what they see for the future, and how we will get there. Our session features Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, Yale Law 64, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, Yale College 72, Professor Cornell Brooks, Yale Law 90, and Democratic National Committee Chair Jamie Harrison, Yale College 98, and it's moderated by University of Baltimore President Kurt Schmoke, Yale College 71. Please be sure to visit our website at www.yaleafm50.com to learn more about our amazing speakers. We hope that this session inspires you to become even more civically engaged, and we thank you for supporting the House community.
Well, thank you all very much for joining us for this discussion about civic engagement. Particularly pleased the fact that we have 4 distinguished Yale University graduates discussing this topic. Of course, we're doing this in the context of a great celebration at the university, the 50th anniversary of the establishment of the Afro-American Cultural Center and the expansion of Afro-American studies at Yale University. Just quickly, people ask me, well, what's civic engagement really mean? And for purposes tonight, we'll just use a short definition of individual and collective actions designed to identify and address issues of public concern. And as I said, 4 distinguished graduates. First, Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton. She is the delegate to the House of Representatives representing the District of Columbia. She's represented the district in the House of Representatives since 1991. Prior to that service, she's a distinguished lawyer and professor. And as we know, she chaired the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission under President Jimmy Carter. She's a Yale Law School graduate. Also joining us, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, who represents the 18th Congressional District in Texas. That is basically all of, or Central Houston. She's represented the 18th Congressional District since 1995. Prior to that service, she was a municipal judge, a lawyer, and a member of the Houston City Council. She's a 1972 graduate of Yale College. Also joining us is Cornell Brooks. So we know Mr. Brooks was president of the NAACP from 2014 to 2017. His distinguished career as a lawyer and activist, also a minister. And he's an adjunct professor, and some of you know him from his many appearances on TV. Mr. Brooks, a graduate of the Yale Law School. And finally, we have Jamie Harrison, who is currently the chairman of the Democratic National Committee. He's held that position since 2021. So we know he is also a lawyer, has worked for the government, worked for Congressman James Clyburn, worked in many other positions. Also in the private sector, he was a lobbyist for the Podesta Group, and he is a Yale College graduate with a major in political science in 1998. So let me start with Congresswoman Norton. Appreciate your being here, and we sent you a few questions. I hope that you're able to take but here, because of this audience that we have right now, primarily people Yale graduates who are interested in the university. What experiences at Yale, whether curricular or extracurricular, influenced the career choices that you've made? It could be a professor, it could be a course, it could be something else that happened, but we're particularly interested in an experience that you might recall that had some impact to influence your career decisions while you're at Yale.
Well, when I came to Yale Law School, I was pretty much set on wanting to be a civil rights lawyer. And Yale prepared me extraordinarily well for a career as a civil rights lawyer. And now as a public official, something I never dreamed of being, because the city that I now represent doesn't have full voting rights. But I was one of only 2 Black women in the class at Yale Law School. That was at a time, the early 60s, when Yale did not have many Blacks, either in Yale College or in the law school. So Yale prepared me very well for a career as a civil rights lawyer and for the career I now have as a member of Congress.
Well, thank you. Mr. Brooks, I'll ask you the same question. Any experiences that you remember, curricular or extracurricular, that affected your career? Yeah.
Sure. So let me just say parenthetically and at the outset that I'm a professor of public leadership and social justice at the Harvard Kennedy School. They wouldn't forgive me if I identified myself as an adjunct here. They work me pretty hard. But in terms of my experiences at Yale, like Congresswoman Norton, I was extraordinarily well prepared. But I'll share with you a little vignette. I came to Yale Law School as a recent graduate of Boston University School of Theology, very much inspired by the moral lineage and legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, but very much uncertain about how well my ministry would be received in a place like Yale Law School. And so I had the occasion of preaching at the Afro-Am Center. The Black church at Yale worshiped at the Afro-Am Center. And in that space, I noticed a woman with beautiful afro saying amen very enthusiastically. That was Bell Hooks. I subsequently met Cornel West in that space. Met all of these great students and professors from across the university in that space. And it was an incredible ground, if you will, of affirmation. And in terms of Yale Law School itself, like the Congresswoman, decades later, the faculty had no Black women. There was scant Latino representation, Asian representation. Nevertheless, in the student body, because of the advocacy of you, Kurt Smoke, and Eleanor Holmes Norton, before, that student body was incredibly diverse. And so, my experience there very much shaped the trajectory of my career in terms of our battles, in terms of emerging critical race theory, diversifying the faculty, looking at the structure of the Yale Law Journal, clerkships, all of those hot button issues animated my experience and really influenced the rest of my career. But the Black church at Yale was special for me.
That's great. That's great. And Mr. Harrison, how about you?
Well, yeah, my experience was a little different because I came to Yale as an undergraduate.
Right.
And, just in terms of the background, I was raised by my grandparents who had a 4th grade education and an 8th grade education. My mom had me when she was a teenager. She dropped out of high school. So I was the first in my family to actually go to college. I remember so clearly when I got my acceptance to Yale, it was April 2nd, 1994. And at that time, we didn't get emails about acceptance. You got either the big envelope or the small one. And I remember going to that mailbox, getting that big envelope, white envelope with that YALE blazing in blue on the corner, and yelling and screaming and saying, "Oh, Grandma, I got in, I got in, I got in." Well, Mr. Smoke, I got in, but the first day I actually stepped on that campus was the first day I had to be there. And when I got there, I felt like a Walmart kid on Rodeo Drive, right? Because nobody from my community went to an Ivy League, let alone someplace like Yale. Yeah. And I got there and I did well in high school, but when I got there, I felt intimidated because all of these kids, many of them knew each other. They had gone to prep school with each other. They wrote these 20, 30-page papers and all. Well, my confidence was shot. First day there, it was just shot. And it wasn't until I went over to the house and I met some of the other young brothers and sisters who were there in their sophomore years and their junior years, who were leading these organizations, who were doing all these great things on campus. And I met two people, Danielle Holly Walker, who is now the Dean of Howard Law, who you know, right. And Gary Stewart, who is this entrepreneur and has done so much. He's now teaching at Yale. And they started this organization called the Yale Black Political Forum. And they started because the Yale Political Union had brought Don King to campus to talk about Black history. And the Yale students were just in up arms. And they said, you know what, we got to talk about our own history and build our own frame. And so we're going to start our own organization. And when I sat in that and listened to the speakers that they brought, it fundamentally changed my life, because then I got involved in the Yale Black Political Forum, and then that allowed me to get involved in other organizations, and it allowed me to find my voice. It allowed me to find my own confidence that has now led me to, to become the first Black chair of the South Carolina Democratic Party and the second elected Black chair of the DNC and to run for the Senate. So Yale is a special place and has a special place in my heart because I found who I was on that campus. And it was because of the brothers and sisters at the house who really helped me to do just that.
Well, I'll ask that question to Congresswoman Lee, but let me jump from the past to the present and ask Congresswoman Norton and gentlemen, I will ask you something similar. There a lot of people identify problems in our society, but fewer actually propose solutions. So I was wondering, because you're known as a problem solver, if you could describe a solution to a societal problem of special concern to you. You're on mute, sorry.
That's a very timely question for me now, because yes, I have found a problem in the society where I live to solve, and that is to obtain statehood for the District of Columbia so that its residents have the same rights as the residents of the states. Congress cannot interfere with could no longer interfere with their businesses. I have gotten this bill passed in the House twice. I've had a Senate hearing, and we're on our way to becoming the 51st state, equal to the people in all the other states.
Congresswoman, is that going to take a constitutional amendment?
No, to become a state, all it takes is a majority vote.
Interesting, because this is something
you have to worry with the filibuster problem, but it's a majority vote issue.
Oh, wow. Getting closer.
Close.
Right. Now, Mr. Brooks, I know you have to be pleased, because I know the NAACP for almost 100 years has been fighting the battle about the federal law against lynching, and finally occurred. And I know you were a big advocate during your time as president of the NAACP. So let me ask you, think of another issue that of particular concern, that what's the solution that you have in mind for that problem?
Sure. So when I left Yale Law School, I clerked for a year, then went to the Lawyers Committee and the Justice Department, prosecuting fair housing cases. And, my strategy at that point was litigation. But then a number of years later, I moved to Newark, New Jersey, and began to meet people emerging from the bowels of the carceral state, coming out of our jails and prisons. And for a bread and butter civil rights lawyer who hadn't had any experience with criminal law, this was shocking. This was shocking. And so I spent the better part of 7 years focusing on how do we deconstruct the carceral state. And so working with colleagues who are lawyers, but also students and grassroots organizations, we put together a strategy, a combination of litigation, research, grassroots advocacy at an organization called the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. And we passed 6 bills in 4.5 years, leading to the greatest decrease of incarceration of any state in the country at that time, in the state of New Jersey. And one of the things it said to me was, whether it was ban the box, bail reform, or what we then called prisoner reentry, is that this combination of research, litigation, grassroots advocacy was key. And in my work at the NAACP, I endeavored to do that. And certainly at Harvard, where I lead the William Monroe Trotter Collaborative for Social Justice, we literally tried to take those multivalent and multilingual tools of advocacy and combine them to bring about effective change when it comes to literally dismantling the carceral state, keeping so many of our aunts and uncles and grandparents and grandchildren out of the prisons and jails. And so for me, what it really represents is what I learned at Yale, namely that the law is powerful, but moral persuasion is powerful. Research is powerful. Grassroots organization, incredibly powerful, but powerful in their combination, not in their isolation.
Great, great. And Mr. Harrison, on that issue about a particular problem that you have a solution for, must face that on a daily basis.
Yes, I face all kinds of problems on a daily basis. I won't talk about the political problems that I'm facing, but I'll tell you about one that I thought about, and it's probably near and dear to Cornell's heart as well, is the fact that so many of our rural communities have lost all sense of hope. Many of these communities are struggling across this country. And the one thing that I like to dispel is this notion that rural, when I talk about rural, that it automatically means white.
Yep.
Rural America is just as diverse as urban America. But the problem we have is we have a massive brain drain. Many of the folks who are growing up in rural communities leave those communities to find opportunity in other places. But you see an even more dearth of infrastructure and investment in these communities. And so now many of them are dying. Many of them are shrinking. But the problems still persist. They're still there. And so when I ran for the US Senate, I created what I call the Rural Hope Agenda to really focus on how we address the issues of healthcare and education and infrastructure in these communities. But I also had this interesting concept that I still want to figure out, and even though I'm not in the US Senate, because the problem still persists, that, urban cities can afford the McKinseys and the various groups out there, consulting firms, to come in and analyze their water issues or the problems with this system and help them come up with solutions to that. Rural communities don't have the resources, and two, many of them don't know about these magical organizations that can do just that, and frankly, they can't afford them. But we have assets in our communities who can play that role. Historically, Black colleges and universities. because many of them are situated in communities or not far from these rural communities with large pockets of Black and Latino citizens. What if we use them to be the McKinseys of the world for these communities, where those communities can come to our historically Black colleges and universities and other universities? We could even have universities like Yale and say, here are the 4 or 5 issues that we're dealing with. Do you have some graduate students who could adopt this as a project, come up, analyze the problem, the issue, and come up with some solutions for how we may move forward on it and actually address this for our community? We got to be thinking outside of the box in terms of, because the problems and the issues persist, but these communities don't have the resources to address them. How do we as a society step up and do that?
Right. Let me, just a couple more. I wonder, Congresswoman Lee, has she been able to join us? Yes, probably not. Congresswoman Norton, just wondering, what's your sense of how society has changed, or has there been a positive change since the George Floyd murder? I mean, we've had a major upheaval with that, and then the pandemic. Just wondering whether your sense of there's been a positive movement in society on race relations or other matters. Are you optimistic about the direction that we're going in?
Well, I tend to be an optimist, and I do think that out of the George Floyd murder came an awakening that we saw in Black Lives Matter, mm-hmm. where Black people have had enormous influence here in the Congress on matters arising out of the George Floyd murder. It simply it was a transformational issue that had an enormous effect. So if you're asking me what, and your question was, had to do with raising the consciousness of individuals in our society, I would say Black Lives Matters. And what work remains to be done, of course, is to take that enthusiasm and finally make Black lives equal.
Right. I was just wondering, particularly since you had been chair of EEOC and many other things, and also I've got on my mind watching the hearing for Ketanji Brown Jackson. It seems things are so divisive, but whether you're still an optimist about the way in which we're moving as a
that's a good issue, because I think she's going to be confirmed, and that will make me even more optimistic.
That's great. Okay. Mr. Brooks, how about you? On the scale, the optimism, pessimism scale about the direction of the country now?
You know, I am always an unreconstructed optimist. And for this reason, you know, when we think about Harriet Tubman back in the day, who delivered 70 people to freedom, helped in the low country of South Carolina deliver 700 more in a military raid. Had she compared the roughly 800 people that she delivered to freedom to the 4 million people who were enslaved, she might have become a pessimist. But at the end of the day, you can't make an empirical case for hope. We decide to hope. So in this moment, when I think about the racial reckoning, as the Congresswoman has lifted up in terms of George Floyd, think about this: 26 million Americans across 550 jurisdictions took to the streets all across this country. And as she lifted up, they asserted Black Lives Matter as a moral claim in protest demonstrations and marches in which most of the people were not Black. That's a cause for hope, one. Two, I want to suggest here that as we saw with the Springfield riots, race riots that gave rise, so-called race riots, race massacres, that gave rise to the NAACP and its call for an end to lynching, that was a moment of consciousness raised without policies enacted. It was the beginning of a policy journey. So in this moment, we have every reason to be hopeful and optimistic in terms of consciousness raised. But our task is to take consciousness raised and turn it into policy enacted And what that means is quite, quite literally looking at decarceration options, looking at alternatives to policing as we traditionally understood it, looking at the research of, say, people like Tracy Mears at Yale Law School and other scholars who are beginning to expand our understanding of things that we can do differently. But at the end of the day, what I think is incredibly important is, as the Congresswoman was lifted up, the fact that you're about to have a Black woman on the Supreme Court, right? We have a Black man who's head of the Democratic Party. On this same call, right, we have a pioneering Black mayor, university president in the person of Kurt Smoke. There's a reason to think that we can do at least as well as our forebears. Like, I just don't get this, sense of pessimism, right? In other words, we're all on the screen because literally, the sacrifices of our forebears, that's why we're here. And last point I'll make here is quite simply this. The reason I went to Yale Law School was because a Black woman in the Low Country of South Carolina, namely Georgetown, said to me, Cornell, you need to go to Yale Law School when I was a teenager. She said, because my brother, Roger Demosthenes O'Kelly, was a Black man in the class of 1912. Okay? He was the first Black deaf lawyer in the United States and a graduate of the class of Yale Law School 1912. Because she said that to me then, I ended up in Yale Law School. Okay? And so my point being is the hope and optimism of our forebears literally lays the groundwork for what it is that we do. So we can't afford to be pessimistic.
Great. You, in fact, allude to something that I'm going to ask as my kind of the last question. But Mr. Harrison, let me give you an opportunity to talk about. I mean, anybody that runs for Senate in South Carolina has got to be an optimist, I guess.
No, that's right.
Let you speak for yourself on that one.
Well, Cornell's from South Carolina also, and he knows our state motto is "While I breathe, I hope." And that is that's the mantra of my life. You can't help but be hopeful. And when I think about the trajectory of my life of where I came from, where I'm trying to go, it is nothing but hope. And so, what the George Floyd murder did, and what we have seen over the course of the last few years. Those folks who are anti-hope, anti-opportunity, and it could even be argued some of them who are anti-Black have been drug out of the darkness and now are into the light. And we as a society have to deal with that, and we have to push back against that. Never did I ever anticipate. Now folks like to, on the other side of using the quote wokeness as is a derogatory word, or using, folks, the African Americans finding their voices, understanding their history and knowing their power is something that is negative as well. So much so that now they're going to trying to ban Black authors and books written by about African American history. It's important that we know that we have to fight back against that. What gives me hope is when we saw all of those protests, and Cornell mentioned this, is that it wasn't just Black folks out there marching. It was everything in America, every shade, every color, every religion, every sexual orientation, gender identity, all of it on display. And it made my heart beam with pride to see that. And so we got to make sure that we work with our allies in other communities to stand up for the issues that are important for us, but also to stand up with and stand with them on issues that are important to them, making sure that we're good allies so that there is no daylight between the groups, because those anti-everybody groups are out there and they want to divide, they want to conquer, but we got to be hopeful warriors and not allow that to happen.
Great. Well, thank you, Congresswoman Lee. It's great to see you. Thank you very much. I know everybody is extremely busy and we're trying to move this along, but I'd like to ask you a question that I've posed to the other members of the panel, and that is that a lot of people identify problems in our society, but fewer actually propose solutions. And because you're in the business of solving problems, I'd like you to think about a particular societal problem that's of concern to you, that you are proposing a solution to that problem. I've given the audience a little bit of your background. I also asked previously about any experience at Yale that might have encouraged you along your career path. So maybe if you could think about those two questions, the Yale experience and the problem, and share with us your views.
Well, I don't know whether to call you classmate, mayor, or Mr. President, but it certainly is good to see you and to let you know that you haven't changed a bit. I'm delighted to be here with my congressional colleague and thank her for her enormous legacy and work. And of course, our chair of the best national party, the Democratic Party, Jamie. And then I call him my professor and scholar, South Carolina, but he is both worldly and now finds himself at Harvard. I don't know what to do about him because, you know, we try to make those trips to Harvard few and far in between, but I am glad, Professor, that you are enlightening our friends at Harvard. This is a challenging time. Thank you so very much. I just came out of a classified briefing on Ukraine. But I did not want to let this moment go by. I'm going to take a small aspect of my early years in the United States Congress when I had a young fellow who was a dentist, so was a fellow who happened to be a dentist, and he saw a problem that we saw together. It was, I think, the time during the West Nile virus that the various items that we used to keep the mosquitoes away were not properly marked with the word DEET, D-E-E-T. Sounds like a small item, but it did not, when you were being told, get a product with DEET in it, none of the products were labeled. And so we took it upon ourselves to work with the EPA and work as quickly as we could through the administrative process to really, we did it through letter writing and advocacy, and I thought of this small item, and before we knew it, I think you can go into all the stores now and find the big word DEET on all your products that will tell you that it has a special element in it to keep the mosquitoes away. I call that a small issue in order to let everyone know that problem solving has a range of areas or a range of magnitude. That was a small one. I encourage our students who are listening to begin problem solving even as they're in college, because you build on how to solve a problem. That didn't have anything to do with great emotion or passion, but it did have a lot to do with making the lives of everyday Americans more ordinary and more better. And so now we can go find products out of the office of Congresswoman Jackson Lee and this fellow who loves science and who was a dentist to have the DEET product noticed. Another one was something that gave me enormous joy, and that is like a 20-year plus desegregation lawsuit against the state of Texas because it discriminated against Texas Southern University and all historically Black colleges. When I came in, it had reached its 25th, may have been even longer. Dear brother out of Mississippi who was now living in Houston and had gone to Texas Southern University had been the lawyer and advocate for this case. And it was like a case that could never be resolved. In fact, there were a number of cases that Cornell will recognize throughout the South. Virginia, all these states had lawsuits against them. And everyone said it couldn't be settled. And being on the Judiciary Committee, fresh and wild-eyed, if you will, loving the law, loving this issue called civil rights, seeing the inequity that Texas Southern University in my congressional district, just a paltry amount of money, barely being noted when the budget process would come through in the state. But with the Clinton administration giving all powers to actually Deval Patrick, Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights. And I've got to get my recollection. Cornell would have either DOE or the DOJ. I think it was the
DOJ because he hired me.
DOJ. We got together. He was determined. We built up all the facts that we could, pushed the issue. Bobby Scott had his lawsuit in Virginia. And before the Clinton administration went out, we settled those cases, of which both Virginia and Texas were left mostly Republican, I hate to put in that context, leadership, Southern-based leadership, left with their mouths open and their shock waves going through their bodies because it actually had teeth in it. It said that you had to build up and stop depriving Black institutions in your budgeting process. And out of that came the Barbara Jordan, Mickey Leland School of Public Affairs. Every time I walk by that school at Texas Southern University, I can see that a fight is worthy and the passion of trying to solve a problem that looked like it could never be solved. That we basically got the court to agree with what we worked with Deval Patrick. Thank you, Assistant Attorney General DOJ, for getting those cases resolved. That was just a piece of solving a baby idea and a big idea. Right. Work on all of them. Problem solving gives life to hope. I agree with hope, but you got to solve a problem to get people to keep on hoping. Right. They see that you've solved a problem, then they will keep on sticking with you. I do have one more, but I want you to, I don't know, other colleagues will close, and then I'd like to come back again. I don't want to.
Right. Well, that in fact leads me to the last question that I wanted to ask the panel, and we'll go with Congresswoman Norton and come around Mr. Brooks, Mr. Harrison, and then Congresswoman Lee. You can have the last word on this. And basically, again, because of the audience that we're dealing with here, what words of advice or encouragement would you share with the Yale alumni and students who are viewing this session, who wish to become more engaged as citizens in both small and large ways?
Well, let me begin by ending this session. I'm not going to be able to stay much longer.
Yep.
My word of advice would be that there are so many more opportunities to solve problems today, and that this is the time to take advantage of those opportunities, that it would be important to stay tuned to the issues. Society is really inflamed with wanting to get things done. I see that in the Congress. So my parting advice would be stay tuned to the issues of the day. And if you do, you will be able to move them on. Don't assume that the issues of the day will be solved tomorrow, not with so many activated and wanting to solve issues. That would be my parting advice for this session.
Good words. Thank you very much, Congresswoman. Mr. Brooks, your advice.
So if I could just paint a picture, if you will. When I arrived at Yale Law School, I walked into the Sterling Law Library and looked up on the bulletin board and saw this beautiful Black woman with curly hair, eyeglasses, and wearing a clerical collar. As a recent graduate of seminary, I was wondering, what is a Black preacher doing in the library of Yale Law School? And I asked the librarian, who is she? And the librarian told me her name is Paulie Murray. So I come back years later as the president and CEO of the NAACP, and I noticed a group of activists and advocates on the campus of Yale talking about the need to change the name of John C. Calhoun College to something else. I hear them talking about the need to look at the curriculum, to look at diversity in terms of the faculty and the student body. And I watch these activists, watch these advocates who are college age, making the intellectual and moral presumption, A, that they're smart enough to think about solutions to problems, and B, that they in fact are right and can help the world see that they're right. And in the wake of their advocacy, we have seen Yale change. So I want to give a shout out to today's students, to the work that they're doing. Right. And if I'm going to be so presumptuous as to offer younger people advice, I would simply say, look at the example of your own. That is to say, students your age who were intellectually presumptuous as to assume that we're smart enough to figure it out, and morally presumptuous to think that we might be right and we can persuade others that we're right if we do the analytic work, if we do the organizational work, if we do the advocacy work. And so when I walk onto the campus today and see a Pauli Murray College, right, that is a representation and a testament to just how brilliant Yale students are, but more importantly, what the rest of us are capable of, including those of us who are too old to be undergraduates at our age.
Well, thank you. Just as a footnote to that, although the Carolinas claim her because she was nurtured in Durham, Pauli Murray was born in Baltimore. So I just,
respect.
I just want to put that footnote in there. Jamie Harrison, what's your advice, Mr. Harrison?
Well, you know, while I was at Yale, I got an opportunity to intern on the Hill twice. First time for my then Senator Fritz Hollins, and then the second time was for Congressman Jim Clyburn, and I was a Congressional Black Caucus Foundation intern. And there were wonderful, wonderful experiences. And so I got on, I then decided that eventually I wanted to work on the Hill. And so I didn't know anybody who worked on the Hill, didn't have friends or family who had worked on the Hill. And I kind of figured things out while I was there. You know, after being on the Hill after a few times, you have a number of coffees and teas with folks who are also trying to figure out how to navigate the Hill, how to get on the Hill, how to climb the Hill and actually build a career. So I then, my wife came up with this idea. She said, well, Jamie, you're having so many coffees, you're not doing your work. Maybe you should write a book about it. Mm-hmm. And I actually did. I wrote a book called How Climbing the Hill, How to Build a Career in Politics and Make a Difference. The heart of the book and the heart of my advice to young people, not only if you're thinking about being in public policy or politics, but I think in life, is to figure out what your passions are. And then once you figure out what those passions are, follow them. You know, when you're an undergrad on Yale's campus, you get all these businesses towards your senior year, all these businesses that come to campus, oh, come here, come there, we'll pay you tons of money. And you feel so much pressure because the herd is going to this group or they're going to that group. And you're still trying to figure out what it is that you want to do and you don't know, but everybody else is doing it. So maybe that means I need to do it. And then you go and do it for 2 or 3 years and you're miserable because it is not the thing that you're passionate about. The thing that I often tell young people is figure out that thing that gets you going, that gets your juices in your stomach going, that really fires you up. And that little feeling, that voice you hear, that is your passion. And then figure out who is doing something like that, right? Get an opportunity to intern with them, figure out what they're doing, and then put yourself in that situation to see if it's something that you want to do. And do that before you go and pay $100,000 and $200,000 to go to law school or to graduate school and everything else. Because again, that herd mentality is everybody else is doing it, so maybe I need to do it. But you don't want to be in hundreds of thousands of debt because you're just trying to figure out what everybody else is doing. Figure out what your passions are, follow your passions. And if you follow your passions, you will do well at it. And if you do well at it, you will get paid for it. And so that is the advice that I give to our young folks all the time. And it's the advice that has not took me down a wrong path. So again, young people, congratulations on where you have come from and where you are going. And just know that you have an entire community of all of us who are here to be helpful along your path.
Well, thank you very much. And so Congresswoman Lee, I'm going to let you have the last words.
Well, I'm going to compress this 3 hours into a few minutes here. I see that I have
Right.
for you. I was about to go over. Thank you for letting me come on at this moment. But let me first say, take every opportunity unselfishly that you can. And so don't pass up an opportunity. It might even be Cornell looking at a picture on the wall.
Yeah.
Jamie taking up 2 interns and not just 1. He might have said enough is enough. But I wanted to compress some of the questions in by saying, first of all, Yale was a place that gave me my stripes, because of all of you who were there, I was there during the revolution. And my children, when I tell this, they always go back on their heels, and I don't let them go back on their heels. I was in the revolution. Bobby Seale, the shutdown of the university. I sometimes don't say this because people, Kurt, start calculating, and you were there too.
Absolutely.
You haven't lived till you've cooked the gruel and eaten the gruel. We had to fix the gruel because thousands came to Yale. And in actuality, the Black students were the armor bearers of calmness, trying to make sure as they weaved in and out of the National Guard that they could keep the calm. We need to look at the history of all those people that came. Kingman Brewster listened to us, or listened to his own devices, and realized this was not a time to stand up and try to push back. It was a time to open the door. There were so many issues. There were issues about how we paid the cafeteria workers. There's YDS. There was the Vietnam War. There's Bobby Seale trial. There was diversity at Yale, and we had to match all of that. So I tell people, take your experiences, turn them into historical life learning. And I really learned. You learned leadership. You learned to listen. You learn to get in disagreements and then get a resolution, because we were actually governing. And I learned to love AFAM, the Black House. The Black Student Alliance at Yale became the governors. I was treasurer. I don't know how long that lasted, but I was an officer. Don't know whether I got to be another officer, got to look at the history of it. But the Black House, among other sites, became places of refuge, learning, intellectual discussion, strategy, and never give up the fight. To the extent that you took the chance, and I can't remember which year that was, but I think it was when all that was happening, to go into the Yale Corporation boardroom, where students never dared to go, but more importantly, that might have been your last room you went into, because maybe that wasn't appropriate for you to go, and you might have gotten your thank you so very much. I'm glad you had a good Yale experience. But we went because we were strategizing. We didn't go in with unpreparedness. We were dealing with serious issues, and we helped the Yale Corporation survive. The Yale survived, and students survived. So I loved what the Black House gave to me in terms of maturity, allegiances, friendships, pontificating with speeches, and then listening to some of the scholarly brothers, because we women had just come, so we were in the freshman, sophomore classes, but there were some amazing scholars that we could listen to. And Mayor wasn't far from it. So that was important to me. Let me finish on this point. I think I got in the Black House experiences. One of the best ones, let me just throw in, was my exposure to the oration part of Yale, and that is the speaking contest, which I went into with great fear, trepidation, but it really framed me. And some of the fellowships that no one knows in different schools, it's not just Yale that you can pick up, but you're in Yale, dig down into the fellowships. We kind of skate over it, find the ones. Henry Tenike Traveling Fellowship, it must still be there. I went all over Africa.
Yeah.
doing Yale research under these fellowships that we may not look. If you're a student, go get that book. You can be anywhere in the world with fellowships at Yale. But let me finish this. Jamie knows, he's probably going to start smiling. You have to be bold in your work that you do. So I happen to be a member of the United States Congress. There's, as Eleanor, we have a myriad of things. There's all kinds of constituent work and other responsibilities. But I've taken up HR 40, the Commission to Study Slavery and Develop Reparation Proposals. And I will tell you, audience, I am not letting go. We have come a mighty long way by faith. Just note that that bill was introduced in 1989 by John Conyers, and John Lewis was right there, based upon the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. I have to wear my legislative hat. What was that about? The Japanese internment,
Right.
my friends. They got reparations. We were excited. We were right there with them. The CBC, the NAACP, we were right there with the Urban League because it was the right thing to do. I want you to know that the Japanese Americans are some of our strongest supporters of HR 40. They keep asking us, what more do you want us to do? So I want to leave with, sometimes things look like a whole lot of ridicule will come your way, or it will mean that you'll be on this side and the crowd will be over there. I imagine that might have been what happened when John first introduced it in 1989. A lot of people, good thinking people, oh, we can't get that. Oh, don't bring that up. Oh, that's embarrassing. Or others who want to push back. Well, you all were not slaves. Well, why do I have to pay? But we have matured this debate with over 300 organizations who have recognized that whatever students we have at Yale, whatever your economic level, you look at the vastness of America, the disparities in wealth are stark, and they're here today.
Yeah.
And so I have kept up HR 40. I think I've even had an opportunity to be at Yale with it on this studying, taking a pause, studying slavery, but then transcending to 2022 and the 21st century and the disparities that exist to develop reparation proposals, which, by the way, I don't dictate what there will be. That will be a commission. I speak about the overall umbrella of dealing with HBCUs and education, fourth graders not reading, and psychological issues that we deal with, sociological issues that we deal with. What about scientific imbalance in terms of us in the science world? Somebody has to stop the world and address our life in America. And I am continuing to do so. I hope to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But if I can leave a response to your question, it is that hope springs eternal when you are working. As we all know, faith without works is dead. And sometimes take on a cause or an issue or a position, like Harriet Tubman. I think Isabella Bunbury was her name, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
Staring her name in the Isabella, Harriet Tubman. She must have been viewed by many, as the movies tell us and the books tell us, what are you? I can't do that. I want the generation of today. I call you the leaders of today. You're not tomorrow, you're today. You take on something that others, I don't want to talk about criminal justice and all that Cornell has already done and we take it on when others don't. Take on something that others will look awry. You'll get the greatest joy. You'll have people ultimately coming through you saying, I'm going to be with you, or I'm going to be advocating, or I'm with you for your success. And you will be most benefited from helping those who could not help themselves and would not have had a voice or an actor or a solution if you had not taken up the cause. That's what I hope Yale has brought and given to all of us, because that's what it's given to me through my own heritage. Thank you, Mom and Dad, that never went to college, for all that you have done. Ivalita and Ezra. I yield back.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Those are good words. And all of you are shining lights. You are just so generous, giving of your time and talents. We really appreciate it. I thank you very much for all you've done in the past, all that you're doing now, and clearly what you will be doing in the future. So with that, Congresswoman Lee, Jamie Harrison, Reverend Dr. Cornell Brooks, we thank you all very much. And this concludes our program. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.